to do today, we had a very nice discussion last week about the Buddha's sermons, and I want to pull some more strings there. You know, one regret I already have for this class is that I didn't spend more time on the Buddha, and I would like to expand that in the future because it's pretty rich. So I'm going to take the opportunity to expand our discussion from last week. I told you that the reason that I wanted us to read, and then with the second hour, we will dive into the book by Appiah. The reason I was interested in having us look at the Buddhism is because it is an anomaly. It is an anomaly in terms of the world religions. It's a totally different look philosophically. It's a different approach. As some of you indicated in your reading responses, Buddhism is often misunderstood. It has often been misunderstood. How should I put this? I don't know how to put it, so I'll just be blunt. Buddhism is often misunderstood by peace, love, hippie types. Sorry. Buddhism is hard. But as Eagleton says, religion is hard. It's what he says about Christianity to Dawkins, right? This is not the opium of the masses. Buddhism is not the opium of the masses. Buddhism and Hinduism, for that matter. It's funny, I had this discussion, it was in another class. We were talking about this. I guess we were talking about cultural appropriation. Or we were talking about here? Yoga? We were talking about yoga culture. I guess this came up in my capitalism class. We were talking about cultural appropriation and yoga culture and how, we might like to borrow certain features of certain religions that seem kind of cool. Where I live, relatively liberal neighborhood, you will tend to see these Tibetan Buddhist flags. Those Tibetan Buddhist flags that are hanging between the poles or on a porch, and they're the prayer flags. You see them, Google it. When you see them, and you're in a liberal neighborhood, and then you'll see the multicolor flags too. And I guess what I'm getting at is we tend to pick and choose certain aspects of Buddhism and Hinduism that sound good, and we ignore the rest. Yoga, such as delivered by Athleta Store, courtesy of the Gap, is very remotely different from the real deal yoga. Yoga is a Sanskrit word, means discipline, very different from how they understand and display that discipline in the Hindu faith. Oh, Finn, what's up?
Oh, I was just going to say, it's like the coexist bumper stickers. Every time I see those, I'm always like, you got the spirit. You're just a little confused. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. I love a metaphysical shop, but I am torn on the inside because every time I walk into the metaphysical shops, I'm like, Nama, stay away from me. Like, I don't want to do this. Like, a white lady with dreadlocks will come up to me and she's wearing a skirt to her ankles and turquoise jewelry. And I'm like, I can't do this right now. I don't even want to get into
this. Okay, I had the same sentiment. I'm trying to articulate it. It's what I'm paid to do. It's not easy sometimes. My job is not easy. What can I say? I'll just go. Yeah, I'll just go for the. I'll go to the safe ground. And the point that I was making is I do not feel that Buddhism has been fairly appreciated or understood. I mean, I'll give you a very simple example. Painfully silly. I told you my friend who was a monk in Thailand, and we're talking like 25 years ago. And I didn't know anything about Thailand. I mean, beyond, I don't know, various pop culture stuff, So we fly out there and I was surprised to see that these Buddhists were eating meat with impunity. Like they were eating meat on meat with meat as a side dish with blood cakes. And I'm like, dude, I thought I just read the Buddhist sermons. I thought the Buddhists would be more vegetarian than this, and more like, and my friend looked at me, he's like, nope. No, I don't know. It's a silly thing, but one of you also noticed in your writing very astutely that one of the more contested visions or discussions, I should say, one of the most contested points about Buddhism is the account of desire, and how that is received, how that claim is received, how that claim is understood. And I would like to delve a little bit into that with your help. Let me just take a minute to go over a couple points. Again, I was talking about what is, remarkable about Buddhism. It is a non-theistic religion, literally meaning there is no singular God. There is no, if you look at the scriptures themselves, there's no recognizable divine at all. My favorite reading is the one of, questions not tending to edification, where Malunkyapota, the monk, comes up to the Buddha and says, I've been with you all this time. And, you've never, I'm getting a little tired of your shit, Buddha. You've never told me, the nature of the soul, how long the universe is going to exist, whether my soul, whether I'm infinite, what's the meaning of blah. And the Buddha is still like, dude, when did I ever say I was going to do that? It's just such a funny retort. When did I say I was going to do that? I never promised that shit. What did I tell you? I told you a very simple message. Can you not get your head around this? Right? And the message being, again, the Four Noble Truths. Life is suffering. The source. By the way, I noticed this on the quote on page 30. This suffering, this is the second noble truth. This suffering has a clear source. It's not just this is the source. It has a clear source, a clear and obvious source. And I'm kind of struck by that. Is it really clear? Is it really obvious? Anyway, the Buddha thinks it is clear and is obvious, and it's your desire, right? So all life is pain. The source of pain is desire. The cure is to extinguish desire. And then the fourth is the Eightfold Path, which we discussed at the end of class last week, which is not easy. And what are we to make of the fact that people, that Malunkyaputta ignores this or overlooks this or thinks there's more? There's a couple options. The first option is we don't want to hear this. We just don't want to hear that, right? It's not good enough. We're not able for it. We want smoke and incense and rituals and intervention by the divine and reliance on priests and priestly figures. We want magic. And indeed, I made it very clear from the beginning, I'm a philosopher, I'm not an anthropologist, but anthropologists will tell you that many of the Buddhist traditions, and there are many, and I think of Tibetan Buddhism in particular, ended up having pretty detailed metaphysical accounts. Tibetan Buddhism is famous for its demons and its angels. Now, I don't know the exact metaphysical status of those things, whether these are real spirits, if you will, or what, but it suggests to me that people were not, what happened, similar to how Malunkyaputta says to Buddha, I need metaphysical answers from you. The Tibetan people said, we want metaphysical answers, right? And so the philosophical point I'm trying to make here is, is that, or it's more of a question, like, is this human nature that we, that we can only be leveled with to such a degree? We need certain helpful lies or illusions. Oh, Zach.
I was just, I don't know, I was wondering if like maybe these questions are the results of other traditions that do answer those questions. Like I wonder if Christian, like just in theory, like if Christianity didn't exist or maybe wasn't as widespread as it is, like would people be asking the same questions that Christianity answers? Like is the fact these questions are being asked at all like the result of the fact that other traditions are asking them and posing an answer to them?
Are you saying that, like, if St. Paul didn't give this account, someone else would have?
Well, I guess I'm saying like I wonder if it is human nature to ask these questions, or if because the questions already existed, they were just asked again in other traditions.
Good. Okay, I get it. I don't have an answer. Good question. Rebecca.
Yeah, this is just kind of on the topic of like hippies appropriating Buddhism. Because it like now I didn't really have a strong understanding of Buddhism before, so I didn't know like what exactly it was that bothered me about these people. But now I get it. And it's definitely like they obviously don't understand the basic doctrines of Buddhism. And if they did, there's a lot of things about them that would be like fundamentally changed. Like when I think of like the yoga hippie people like in America who will either like be Buddhists or they're, like spiritual. I always think of people who are like on Instagram selling like coaching courses for $200. They have like yoga classes. They have like Instagram, like, pages that are like super aesthetic. And I just am like, if you were following Buddhism, you probably wouldn't be on Instagram. Like that app is just a desire like system. Like it doesn't make sense.
Mhm.
And so it seems clear to me that a lot of them are just like kind of taking the meditative parts of Buddhism and like the control over your own life parts,
Mhm.
and then just like injecting capitalism into it, like really intensely. Yeah, I don't know. It just is something that I'm always eager to talk about because it really annoys me.
Mhm. Okay, very good. Oh, Brittany.
I was thinking, I don't know if asking those questions is necessarily human nature, but you know what does seem like it's human nature? Running away from accountability, because that's kind of what the Buddha gives people. Like, I'm not going to fix your life for you.
Yeah.
I'll show you how, but you're going to fix it yourself. And people are like, no, we want you to do it for us. We want rituals, and we want you to intervene in our lives, and we don't want to have to do anything, like actually do anything. And so yeah, but that was my first thought. Like when they realized that the Buddha wasn't going to do it for them, and they had to, make a difference in their own lives. They were like, oh no, this isn't cool anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. I have to do it myself.
Good. Yeah, and I think, contemporary consumer culture probably makes this doubly hard. It is so hard to walk around, and to surf the web and not have your appetite piqued for something. You're being to be a 21st century American or global citizen is to be constantly hungry for stuff, and constantly groomed. I'm talking about this in another class, but I wrote a book about, privacy and surveillance capitalism and the kinds of things that marketers do and Facebook does to profile us and monetize us and then manipulate us. I hear what you're saying, Rebecca. It seems almost a contradiction to be a digital citizen and a Buddhist. I don't know how, and we haven't even talked about the issue of mindfulness, but just the desire itself. Zach?
I don't know. I just wanted to like maybe propose a connection between like what we're talking about as like hippies and like the counterculture movement and Buddhism. And I think the idea of like new age religion is a really useful topic here, in that like it's kind of a catch-all term, but like it kind of, the general consensus is that like it arose during the counterculture movement in like the 60s. And it kind of repurposes a lot of religious imagery from a lot of different traditions. And it kind of like uses them to its own ends. And I think that is like, it happened for like Christian imagery. And I think it also just as well, it happened for Buddhist imagery. And I just wanted to like propose that kind of connection.
Yeah, no, you kind of zeroed in on it there, Zach. You raise a very good issue, I mean, we have dealt with this briefly, and this is a very, since you're interested in spirituality and some of your others as well, we might as well talk about this. Eagleton gives he gives some space to this criticism of spirituality, which is, is this the pick and choose form of faith that we're problematizing here, that we're zeroing in on? The point being, I guess what I was saying about Buddhism kind of fits with Eagleton. I mean, what I was saying is that what I think people overlook or ignore when it comes to Buddhism, I think they ignore the degree of self-sacrifice. They ignore the degree of discipline that's required, and the caricature is that modern new age spirituality hasn't done that. That's the caricature. I leave that to the research projects to prove me either way, but Rebecca.
Yeah, definitely. Like in that vein, I do think that there are people who use like more new age practices in ways that are like okay. Like it's definitely not all, the stereotype we're kind of talking about. But I also do think like the new age hippies of the 60s seem to be like very different than the ones I see the most today. Like a lot of those people back in the 60s were anti-capitalist, they were activists, like they were using like different practices, but they were also like doing a lot of like political work. Whereas I feel like now the ones that I see most of, at least, are like trust fund babies who just want to go live in Hawaii. So I'm not sure like what changed there. And like what made it so different, because like even I would consider myself like both religious but also kind of spiritual, and there are elements of religions that I've kind of incorporated into my life, and I don't consider myself to be like an Instagram hippie. So I don't know, I'm just kind of wondering like what differences we could determine between those two veins, because it seems like there's kind of two different types of those people.
Yeah.
And one of them is obviously really negative, but then the other one is a little bit, it's a little bit more of a gray area.
Yeah, good. Yeah. I guess the first thing that I would say is, there is an inherent difficulty with this conversation only because spirituality is a very amorphous term. That's something that the critics have noticed as well. Like it means a lot of different things. Who knows exactly what it means? There tends to be some migration or agreement around a couple themes. The rejection of organized religion, a rejection of hierarchy, But then, I guess more, greater individualism, which cuts both ways, because then it can also be seen as self-indulgence. Less interest in rituals, at least prescribed rituals. And that's where spirituality tends to veer then in towards like self-help traditions, which are not all bad, because I've done yoga. It's actually really good for you. I like it. I'm just not, making any pretenses to this as anything more than exercise for me. But that's all I have to say about that for now. Finn.
Oh, I was actually going to talk about how, with going off of what Rebecca was talking about, I think that acknowledging what like early activists, like in the 60s, for example, were doing with it, I would argue and just say that like they were just so anti-America and anti like capitalism Christianity that they sought something they felt was less committal or less intense, less like shitty, like, you know what I mean? Because Buddha's tenets, like if you read it with the right tone of voice, it can sound just like, hey, who cares? You know what I mean? So I think that that was like the major appeal with it, instead of like, just actually evolving like the practice. And then there's just like another elephant in the room to me that is like the idea that colonialism is what like oppressed Buddhism in like the regions it came from. And it was made by not Europeans. So it's kind of, I don't know, I think there's this like very tangible irony in like these white Americans being like, I just really connect with it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that, I think that it's to be said that I like the activism element, but I think that they were so separate from Buddhism itself that it's just like non-applicable in some ways, that they were just like yoga and I'm going to wear the cool necklaces and I'm going to have a great time. But yeah, I just think it has like a sinister energy at some point.
And thank you, Finn. I'm going to insert one little point there because there is something I can speak to. You were talking about why the revelation, why Hinduism and Buddhism made such a splash in the 60s of all times, and why people were so interested and excited. A big part of it is something called, oh shit, where's my chat here? Ecumenism. What ecumenism means is a recognition of the commonalities between faiths. That was something that was very prominent in the 60s. In the Catholic Church, you had something called the Second Vatican Council, which according to Catholics, what this is, it opened up the windows. Prior to the 1960s, if you went to a Catholic mass, the priest turned his back to the audience, he would say everything in Latin. It was crazy. And then after the Second Vatican Council, the priest turned around and delivers mass in the vernacular, and it's more of like an engagement. And one of the great, and that was in 1962. And one of the great things that came out of that council also was that there had been, prior to that council, the Catholic Church had said, we are the only true path. And and there are inherent problems with these other faiths. And then in 62, that was washed away. And I mentioned to you that one of the great importers of Buddhism into the West, a guy named Thomas Merton, who was a Trappist monk. And what he did in his work is he pointed out all of the commonalities between Buddhist scriptures and Christian scriptures. And so that was very eye-opening at the time to people, maybe it worked part and parcel with the civil rights movement, this understandings between different cultures. Of course, it was very powerful in America in the 60s because we were at war in Vietnam, which is a Buddhist country. One of the most important images of the Vietnam War is the image of the Buddhist monk who had immolated himself in the street as a protest against the war. I believe that was 1967. And that should give you an indication of how hard-nosed that religion is. It's quite the opposite of peace, love, and happiness when they're engaging in that kind of, immolation, that kind of penance. Zach.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about what you were saying about like spirituality being kind of generally like it lacks hierarchy and places emphasis on individuality, and also emphasis on like non-adherence to institution.
Roughly.
I feel right, right. And those are like in the research that I've been doing for my essay, those are like things that I address and things that I have also like found, and that I feel like these all three of these things are kind of the result of like the fact that spirituality kind of revolves around like experience, or like the experience of the individual, and it's experiential, and like I think that that also connects to Buddhism, because like a big part of it is like what we were talking about, like mindfulness, and like that is an experiential thing. It's not metaphysical, really. It's not intellectualized. It's I feel like it's kind of in a big way about the experience of the individual observer.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think that that kind of connects to the tradition of like Western Gnosticism and spirituality, which maybe is part of the reason that New Age religion like co-opts Buddhism, because it has this element of like experientiality, and like as a result individualism and lack of hierarchy and individual connection and things like that.
Good. Yeah, just to recall, Eagleton's critique of spirituality is that it is individualistic, it is overly selfish, it is contaminated by, or it is concordant with capitalism. And so it and capitalism is always going to take, invite you to overlook sacrifice or ignore sacrifice in favor of indulgence. And so, Eagleton says that these are problems with spirituality as well. I'm putting this in the chat. It just occurs to me, cult and spirituality seem to be at odds with each other. They seem to be at the extremes. If spirituality is individualistic, cult is quite the opposite. It seems to be extremely hierarchical, as Brittany was pointing out, and rather rigid. The opposite of egotistical, but to the nth degree. Just offering that up. Hey, Finn, did you want to say something else?
Oh no, I'm just a dumbass. Sorry.
No worries. Let me press on and say a few more things, then I have a question for everybody. Right. One of the other funny readings that I had you all look at was, the Buddha is dying, and the monks are all like walking around him. The Buddha lived a very long life, about 80 years old, and he was a, very well-known celebrity in his lifetime. He was already revered as a religious figure. And he had traveled a bit around the Indian subcontinent. And when he's dying, this is a big deal, and the monks are very scared and worried and full of trepidation, and you can imagine they weren't sure how to carry on his teaching. And they say to him before he's dying, this is the Buddha's farewell address that I had you read. He says, do you have any last instructions? And again, the Buddha is like, listen, have you not been listening to me this whole time? I have no esoteric teaching. Esoteric means secret. I have told you everything. And it was very simple, dude. Four Noble Truths. Very simple. It's what I told you. And his other part of the message is, you're not going to have me around, to kick around anymore. And this is on you. One of the major teachings of Buddhism is that you shall have no guru. You shall have no guru, no teacher to rely on. You must rely on yourself. A couple of other Buddhist sayings. If you see the Buddha in the road, kill him. That's a famous Buddhist saying. And the monks will repeat to themselves over and over again, the Buddha is shit, the Buddha is shit, the Buddha is shit, because of this extreme concern that you will become dependent on an authority figure. You have to be your own authority figure. And why is that? It's very simple. It's in the Four Noble Truths. Who else is going to help you root out your desires? No one. Because no one is going to know your desires as intimately as you. And no one is around as much as you are to pay attention to those desires and to root them out, right? You're always there. You're always around when those desires are around. So it's up to you. It can't be for anybody else. And if you have the chance, I urge you to read the Dhammapada again in greater, with, when you have more time. This is the Way of Truth in your reading, starting on page 52. This is the real classic. These are sayings of the Buddha. I really like the Dhammapada. I keep it by my bedside. I find it so beautiful. And the general themes we discussed towards the end of class last week, that pain is of your own making. Pain and suffering depend on your thoughts. And we talked, he talks about hatred as being the kind of idea, is an example of how your thoughts can hurt you. Hatred looks like it's outwardly directed, but it's not. He says at one point, it's like blowing fine dust into the wind. It blows back in your face, right? To hate another. Right. So message to all the haters out there. Hatred does pain to you. Hatred does pain to you. In order, he gives some ideas for how to root out hatred, how to diminish hatred. And basically it has to do with the idea that we must understand, our mortality. We must face up to our mortality. We had a very nice discussion last week about death and, how much people really pay attention or really accept it or folk face up to it. And I mentioned to you that, Buddhist monks, they will meditate with images or pictures of dead bodies and, decaying bodies. My friend, when he was a monk briefly, he had to meditate next to a corpse. You don't really hear the hippies doing this kind of stuff, right? This is where it gets hardcore, right? You have to accept that you're dying. Funny story about technology in Buddhism. A few years ago, I was teaching something about the Buddhism, I can't remember. And the student pointed out to me there was a Buddhist app. And the Buddhist app was pretty funny. I forget the name of it. But every few hours at random, you'll be sitting there doing whatever, and your app will go, your phone will start to send a message, and it'll say, you are dying, you will die, you will be dead forever. So that you can just remember this every few, like get into a fight with your wife, your phone goes off, you will die, you will be dead forever. You're like, oh, honey, whatever, fight with you, honey, come here, bring it in, give a hug, right? And that's exactly the kind of mortal deflation that we require, to, if we could remember the big picture, this would really bring home how silly all these conflicts are. Any questions? All right. Don't have a wife to fight with. No, dude, you'll lose. I always lose. I have a PhD in philosophy and I lose every fight, even with my kids. It's very depressing. Anyway, I'm much better at asking questions. Oh, Chris, you're funny. Let me Let me, I have a question for everybody here, so let me pull it up. Okay. Question. I'm putting this in the chat. Okay. This is a thought question. I want you to get your pens or your keyboards ready. I want you to, I'm going to give you guys a minute or two to really think about this answer. Okay. Here is the question. Think, right? You are the source of pain and suffering. The source is in you. How does that make you feel? Take a minute and write something. Put it in the chat.
I have a follow-up question. Do you mean like pain and suffering for yourself or pain and suffering for others or both?
Oh, M. Let's say for yourself. You're the source of your own misery. How about that?
Got it. Okay, that helps me.
Thank you. Yeah, Brittany, that makes me feel heavy but liberated. Okay. Good. Okay. That's interesting, Alex. Good point, Irish. Raven, what are you on about? Where's Raven? Raven, would you explain?
Yeah, I'm here. It's like if there is some pain source, it's inside you, like mental illness or just some symptoms, then you need to just stay up with it for a lifetime, or I don't know. Actually, this is hard to describe because you cannot just make things come to an end easily. And one way is to just control yourself and try to make things better.
I think I know what you're saying, and I see Tobias, I think, might even echo what you're saying. You know, the reason I put this question in here, and some of you have sensed the issue, is that the Buddhist challenge is at the same time empowering and liberating, and it's daunting. You are in suffering. A solution is here. A solution is proximate. It's up to you. It's in you.
And one thing's for real, that my mom wants, she said it 4 years ago that she wants me to become a monk to remove all my pain. Yes. Yeah, she said I can just, you know, learn the summons of the Buddha and just try to ignore the pain and to learn something like spiritual and just focus on knowledge of the truth itself. She thinks it's worth it.
She thinks it's worth it. Yes. Well, yeah. Right. On one hand, it's empowering and liberating. On the other hand, it is daunting, and it's daunting in the respect, what if I'm not able for it? What if I give it my all and I'm not able for it? I'm just looking at some of the other stuff in the chat. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't honestly know where I stand on it. I find it inspiring on one hand when the Buddha says, listen, let's cut the bullshit. It's very simple. But on the other hand, it's not easy. This was written, as some of you have very astutely started pointing out the problem of mental illness. This was written before any notion of mental illness was ever conceived. By the way, there is, and there's no mistake, there's considerable overlap between Buddhism and 20th century psychoanalysis. One of the philosophers who introduces Buddhism and Hinduism into the West is a guy by the name of Arthur Schopenhauer, who was a real asshole. But he, in turn, inspires Freud indirectly. Freudian psychoanalysis is rather simple. It's rather similar. In so many words, the revelation of Freudian psychoanalysis is, your neurosis is your own, the source of your neurosis is in you, and you have the power to solve it. Will you do that? And I remember I had a conversation with a psychiatrist about Freud, and he said his complaint about Freudian psychoanalysis, he says that it makes his patients feel guilty. And I'm reminded of this thinking about Buddhism here, because I wonder, it puts a lot of emphasis on the individual and on individual responsibility, which is certainly a good thing, no doubt. But what do you do for individuals who are not able to, because, root out desire? And listen, let's be honest, most humans are not, right? So how do you live with that? There's no indication that Buddhism is mean or like, if you can't root out desire, you are a loser. He never says that, but I do feel like it puts a good deal of pressure on you. If you're a Buddhist and then 40 years later, you're still miserable, whose fault is it? I mean, strictly speaking, I think Buddhism would say, well, there's a fault in human nature. There's a fault in human nature. But unfortunately, the greatest path to salvation is through you as an individual. And that's just tough. That is tough. That's not easy. And, it has, again, has to do with this issue of desire. So I have a second question for everybody. Oh, where'd my questions go? I want to put it in the chat here. how do you feel about the prospect of a life without desire? And part 2, what does it mean to love without desire? These are good fucking questions, you gotta admit, right? Yeah, I'm pretty proud. Just give your first impression thought, like, oh, yeah, write something out, Em, please. Take a minute, write something thoughtful. What your first impression, like a life without desire, how does that sound to you? What would love without desire look like? See, that's what I'm afraid of, Arthur. Why is that? That's a problem, no? Mm-hmm. 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 And how good is that progress of technology, Raven?
It's like if people are all satisfied with what they are having now, about like life or the society, and there will be nothing that drives people to make things better. We'll just accept everything. Like what we have, and the civilization would be just stopped.
Well, I'm going to take a page from Eagleton and say, progress is not a good in itself, right? We have made life longer thanks to modern medicine, but is life better quality? We have incredible digital technology that allows you and me to talk about philosophical issues, but half the world is jerking off to internet porn. So, sorry, that was a little rough, but you understand the point. So, by the way, I think you're totally right, Raven. Like, desire is what drives progress, but the philosophical response is, what is that progress worth? Really, seriously, honestly.
And sometimes I think the progress is not only about the level of the society, but also about humanity, like human rights, and do the right things to help people.
Moral progress.
Yeah, moral progress.
Excellent, Raven. Is there moral progress? That's a
I think
thorny
desire is just what people longing and what they want. Sometimes it's not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. And that's a very, you know, I'm not even pretend to respond to that at 2:19 p.m. I mean, that's a tough one. You know, again, Eagleton is very skeptical of moral progress as well. You know, Jim Crow in America is only 50 years old. The Holocaust is 70 years old. You know, there are plenty of genocidal acts going on. There's still good reason to be worried about moral progress, but that would be a very good sign of progress. Absolutely. Tobias says to love without desire means to love unconditionally. Love someone free of expectation, regardless of if they love you back. That's very nice. I think the Buddha would appreciate that, Tobias, because that is the Buddha's proposition, right? The Buddha's proposition, at the end, the Buddha urges compassion and love for all things. And Buddhists would prescribe that love should be desireless. What does that mean? Doesn't mean you can't have sex, because Buddhists have obviously got that figured out. It means, wow, this is a question that just occurred to me that I will throw out there, and I do not want an answer because it's too complicated. But what is, I said, what is love without desire? What is sex without desire? Jeez. I just got so worried. I don't know. You guys are funny. Well, what love without desire says to me, that is, it is love that is not possessive. Love, when love is possessive, love is problematic. Right? Are you open to the other? Are you respectful? Or are you blind and merely interested in consuming the other? Desire is often concordant with consuming, selfish consuming. So what desireless love says to me is the possibility of love that is truly open and attentive.
Min, may I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Since I'm gonna guess you're the only one that's married in this class, how does that mean for you? Love
The
no
only one
desire.
that's what?
Like you're the only one, like I think you're the only one that's like married in the Zoom
Oh,
call.
married.
Yeah. So what does that love no desire mean for you?
You're funny to put me
I tried
on
it.
the spot. Well, I'll give you all a hint. This is the point of Buddhism where I depart, because I cannot accept a life without desire. But what it says to me is that it's very wise. It's great wisdom for relationships, in that you be open. How many, one of the major, think about the many different problems of love, jealousy, right? Jealousy is a big problem. What is jealousy? Jealousy is you want to possess your partner. And that's very unhealthy. And you're actually disrespecting your partner. Jealousy is disrespectful, right? Why is it disrespectful? Because it is selfish. It's not open. It's not trustworthy. So when I hear the word desireless love, when I hear the Buddha's recommendation for that, Natan, what I hear is that the Buddha is saying, really respect the other as an individual. Don't try and consume or claim, right? But be open. Chris.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I think I also wrote a bit about that in my response to the question. But I was reading this thing where it's they're noticing that a lot of modern American relationships can be really unhealthily codependent. And in that sense, I think it does touch base on what we expect. And everyone knows that couple that has been together so long simply because they don't want to be alone, and it's really horrible. And it's the idea that that relationships are something that are to be desired and that we should all aspire to, and that people are staying things much longer than they need to because they don't want to deal with the alternative of being alone or dealing with the fact that they might not be desirable because they're alone. And when we talk about possession, I think a lot the pain that we associate with failed relationships is because of a failure to possess it, and we take that as a personal failing as opposed to the actual nature of relationships, and that they transform and they go and they come as they please.
And people change. People change too, right? I wrote an essay about this, actually. It's online somewhere about true love. Believe it or not, I don't usually write about love. I don't know what came over me, but well, I was writing about a topic that is very much at the core of what we're getting at here. How is love or advertised and glorified in our capitalist society? It's glorified as this idea of your soulmate. And there is no bigger bullshit idea in humankind than the idea of a soulmate. Very, very dangerous notion. And why is that? Because it means that you have some preconceived idea of what you're looking for, or, you know, this ideal. And it's got to be, oh God, Irish, you're so funny. And it's got to, but, and again, what the Buddha is urging is for us to be open. People are surprising, you know, people are surprising and mysterious. Don't foreclose upon them. Don't think you have them figured out. Be open. And you'll be surprised what you find. So what I ended up arguing in the paper is that true love might exist, but you don't get it like a flash as soon as you see Matthew McConaughey. It comes over time and through a lot of effort and work, and it's very unexpected, you know, and it's never solid and undying. You will hate your partner. That will happen. Freud pointed it out, like love and hate go hand in hand. Like the person you love the most will also be the person you hate the most. It's weird. It's just weird. It's just the way it is. Anyway. Well, okay, Rebecca, but you also have to understand that the universe has surprises for you. I guess that's all I wanted to make. Like, just be open, you know? And the danger of human desire is that human desire wants to own and to possess. And the soul, you know, the ego wants to see itself everywhere. And you have to lose that urge. And it's not easy. All right, cool. Anybody else want to chime in? Any questions or comments? I don't know. I guess I walked into it. I didn't really. I was sitting here wondering, why am I talking about love? And as well, I posed the question. What I wanted to say is, though, just on a personal level, I don't think I can imagine a life without desire, even though I understand the call and the wisdom of it. Oh, I am what everybody, I am what you call an Epicurean, guys. I like Epicureans. Epicureans live for moderate pleasure. Oscar Wilde had a nice, Oscar Wilde is the wisest guy who ever lived. And Oscar Wilde said, the beautiful thing about a cigarette is that as soon as you're done, you want another, right? You know, did the Buddha realize that desire might be the goal? You know, it's fun to want things. The wisdom of Epicureanism is that Epicureanism is very simple. It's the idea that, you know, the objective of life is to cultivate pleasures and to enjoy your pleasures, but Epicurus, the founder, he lived just after Socrates, he realized that, you know, the quickest way to undermine pleasure is to indulge, because pleasure quickly gives way to pain. But, you know, there are too many good things in this world, you know, to not to say goodbye to desire, and that would be a real shame. I just had a very good whiskey on Saturday night. I would be very upset if I could never sip that again. That said, I will point out that this too is a misconception of Buddhism. And there are many different sects of Buddhism, right? Some of them are very ascetic, hard-nosed, And yet I remember the other thing I saw in Thailand, you see these pictures of, you see these statues of the Buddha everywhere, and the Buddha is not skinny. He is a big fat dude with a belly, and he's smiling and happy. So you look at that, you're like, you know, I think the message is that you can enjoy life, but you must release yourself from desire somehow. You know, as Plato says, desire is a tyrant. How do you live in such a way that you release yourself from that tyrant? You know, that might be the general claim. But again, in Buddhism, you get different prescriptions for different sects and for different people. Some are very hard-nosed and ascetic. Some are moderate. And don't forget, the very first Buddhist doctrine is the doctrine of the middle path, right? Don't kill yourself with sacrifice, but don't indulge. The way to happiness is a middle path, some kind of moderation. But it is generally the kind of moderation that will resist indulgence generally. You know, it's not the kind of lifestyle where you have a Cinnabon every day and, you know, give in to many desires, because one thing the philosophers all agree on is that materialism is dissatisfying in the end. Oh, Arthur said something funny. Okay. Sounds good. Good. Okay. Anybody else want to chime in? Okay. All right. I'm going to spend the next half hour talking about the Appiah book. I thought I would have more time, but it's okay. That was a good discussion about Buddhism. The reason I wanted you to read Appiah is because he's a great writer. He's a contemporary philosopher. He teaches up at Columbia in New York. Anthony Kwame Appiah is, I believe it's pronounced Appiah. He is very interesting guy. You may have noticed, I think in one of the essays, he talks about his background. His mother is British, his father is from Ghana. He was raised in Ghana, and then he, I believe he does his PhD in England, and then he gets his job in the States. He lives in New York. He's gay, which is one of the reasons that he engages with the issue of homosexuality in the Christian God, in the New Testament. And I think he's a religious person, as far as I can tell. He certainly knows religion extremely well. I see some of you liked how he writes. I think he's a good writer. I do. Since we only have about half hour, I'm going to hit on some of the main points and just open it up for discussion where you all want to ask a question. He says a couple things pretty remarkable early on. By the way, Appiah is largely a political philosopher, actually. So he approaches the issue of religion from that point. I took one of your essays is from a book called The Lies That Bind. He wrote this book about 3 years ago, I think. There have been 2018. There have been a lot of books about identity politics in the last few years. Because a lot of academics and scholars on the left, a lot of liberals are struggling with identity politics. You know, there was a general consensus that Trumpism is an aspect of identity politics, right? I don't think there's much mystery about that anymore, right? He was elected by white working class people who have racial grudges, and ironically, it is a reaction to identity politics that has dominated the left for a long time. You can't have identity politics on the left without expecting it on the right. And so there's a crisis about identity politics and what it means, but also nationalism. Globally speaking, we see nationalism all over the place. And this book, Lies That Bind, the title's lovely, The Lies That Bind Us, right? This is his way of poking holes in the various identities and nationalisms, that we like to try and organize ourselves around, that we like to try and let define us. And in this chapter, that I had you read about religion, he pokes holes in the ideas that our religion can be a clear and concise definition or identity term. Right? So he tells us here at the very beginning on page 36, says, religion, there's a quote, is not in the first instance a matter of belief. Religion is not in the first instance a matter of belief. Well, if it's not a matter of belief, what is it then? Cult. Well, yes, but not in the way you mean it. Remember what I told you all cult means? What does cult mean? Cultus in Latin. What does cultus mean? Oh, Rebecca, you have the floor.
I don't have the definition of cultus, but
Sorry about it.
in what he was talking about with religion, he also mentioned that like two other components of it are practice and fellowship. So like rituals, things that you do, but also like the people that you do it with.
Yep.
And he was talking about how like a lot of people follow religions or, are like culturally part of a religion and they identify with that religion, but they might not even necessarily do all the practices or share the same beliefs as other people in that same umbrella. So it can't always just be defined by belief because like a lot of people, Christians, just for an example, like many of them believe widely different things based on denomination. And then people in that denomination might believe different things on an individual level. And, he was talking about how that wasn't always the case. It's more so like pluralism that's made this so like shifted, like people use their religion as an identifier less so than as like a belief system.
Good. Well, in the modern world, and you see this globally, people are using, he talks a lot about like the Muslim world, but also in the States, you see this quite a bit. I'm a Christian, stuff like that. And his general argument is that this is a tricky term to identify yourself with for many of the reasons you mentioned, right? Which I'll get into. But essentially, I like this opening because this is a handy retort to Dawkins, but also to James, where we started with. Religion is not a matter of belief. As he says on page 36, there are two other components. They are practice and community, and those are not to be minimized. Cult in Latin meant worship. So that's what encompassed all these things. It actually referred more to the ritual practices that you carried out in community. Ritual is always or typically in community, or it evokes what a community does. Even if you say your rosary beads on your own, your prayer beads or whatever, you're evoking a community. So belief, practice, community, these three together are the main components of religion. And here's another beautiful quote on page 39. He says that each of us is a sect of one. That's page 39. And that very much gets at what you're talking about, Rebecca. That's a very interesting statement, especially what we were talking about with Zach a minute ago about spirituality. Spirituality's great claim is that it is individualistic, and yet what Appiah is pointing out is that there actually is already room in the traditional faiths for this kind of individualism, because every faith is practiced individually anyway. Every people understand, as Rebecca was talking about these different rituals, people understand rituals differently, you know? So everybody understands and interprets the faith differently. Zach?
Yeah, I just wanted to say in terms of spirituality, I think that what you're saying is like relevant to that, like spirituality can exist both within and outside of religion, like the experiential, individualistic nature of religious beliefs that exists as well as outside of institutional religion.
Yeah, sure. But, you know, I might say this, and maybe I'm speaking too much off the cuff, but people, you know, may tend to, and maybe this doesn't characterize you guys, so don't take it personally, but many people tend to, you know, to think that religions are monolithic in the sense that if you are X religion, then you must follow these beliefs. And that is very often not the case, you know. That just is, it's so often, it's more often not. That's what I found in my own experience. Any case, I'm just going to move on. Here's a beautiful quote, bottom 41. He says, if by a religion you meant a single coherent set of doctrines, precepts, and practices, then none of the familiar global religions would be one religion, right? And this is where he you know, he points out that so this is where I was thinking of what you were getting at, Finn, with your paper idea is, you know, something has happened culturally over the last millennia or two that has led us to think of Judaism or Christianity or the Judeo-Christian tradition as, or Islam as monolithic faiths, but they are very dispersed. For many, most of their history, they were very dispersed, right? He gives a very egregious example, which is the example of Hinduism. I need to study more about this. This is on page 43, but the history of Hinduism is pretty interesting in that, you know, prior to the British arrival in the 1800s, there really is no such thing as Hinduism, properly speaking. It's a collection of local cults, and I mean cult in the sense, I mean in the Roman sense, different traditions of worship. Oop, better watch myself. That's my daughter, everybody. That's not my wife. Okay. Anyway, so there are different traditions of worship across the Indian subcontinent. And the British show up and they're like, what is this? We don't know what this is. Let's call it, what language you speak? Hindu? Let's call this Hinduism. Pretty ridiculous. And he even describes that the, you know, now Appiah is careful, right? He points out, he says, the story is typically chalked up to the British, but it may well have been Islam before it. I don't know Indian history very well, but for many centuries, there are very important Muslim kingdoms in India. And so Hinduism may have, this process of unifying Hinduism may have already started in contradistinction to Islam. But the British certainly were not, they were very confused and they wanted to organize it as well. And so there was a general move to say, well, we have identified a couple of iconic scriptures. Let's say that the religion is organized around these scriptures, these being the Upanishads, the Vedas, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata. And for those of you who know, the Bhagavad Gita is part of the Mahabharata. And he calls this, you know, so because of this tendency to organize, which may be a cultural tendency, might have been a political tendency, he says is tempting to people are tempted by scriptural, something called scriptural determinism, which is to say that if religions are organized around or identified by these specific texts, then these texts clearly determine everything you believe, and they can answer all your problems, all your questions. And that is a load of crap because of the nature of these scriptures. I can certainly, he talks about the essential scriptures of Christianity, the Gospels, but also the Kashrut and some of the scriptures in Judaism. And I believe he references some of the Quran as well. And we didn't really get into it, but some of the later Buddhist doctrines between the Mahayana and the Theravada traditions, they contradict one another. You get contradictions throughout these scriptures. There's no clarity. There's no clarity at all, you know, about a lot of main issues, you know. Understanding religious teachings is a matter of interpretation. That's all there is to it. You cannot go to these texts and expect quick and easy answers. He tells us on page 46, he says, you know, what these scriptures have in common is language is poetical, metaphorical, and obscure. Page 46, language is poetical, metaphorical, and obscure. He gives a lot of examples from Christianity. You know, about Judaism, he talks about the kashrut, which is that part of the Old Testament that says what Jews may and may not eat. I believe it is in the book of Leviticus. If you have your Bible handy, it's in there. And that's a really funny passage. You know, you might be tempted to think this is very straightforward, right? What do we know about kosher? Well, we know kosher folk, they don't eat pork. Check. Easy. My wife had a Jewish boyfriend in college, and he got into fights with other Jewish friends about using bacon bits. He thought he could use them because they weren't pork, and all his friends said, you're being a fucking hypocrite. They taste like pork. So anyway, my wife went to a crazy college. But anyway, he indicates there's all these mysterious, I urge you to look at Leviticus. Go ahead and look. I once remember, I read this in Bible study class with my sixth graders once, and I was immediately stumped. Fish with certain types of scales, you can't tell what they are. Certain birds don't eat this bird. What is it? A purple. What the fuck is a purple? Don't know what that is. I think he mentions one of them translates as a vomiting. That might be a pelican. Don't eat pelicans. I didn't know that was a problem, but okay. Are you sure we're talking about pelicans here? Right? It's never clear. It's never clear, right? This part of the Bible that looks like it would be the clearest is not. I see Arthur's question. Pork is a dangerous meat, and it should not be consumed raw. That's for sure. Muslims have a similar prohibition against it. It's up to us Christians to eat the pork. Actually, Buddhists like it too. And speculation is that there was a prohibition on pork because pork will carry parasites, especially raw pork. So you got to be careful. Of course, it's often said don't eat pork because it is dirty, but I don't know that it's dirtier than any other animals. Let's see, I have 10 more minutes. I'm just going to keep pushing ahead here. You know, he maintains that there is a lot of ambiguity in the supposedly unified scriptures as well. I mean, what you have, I talked about this earlier in this class, what you have in the Old Testament, the New Testament is you have a lot of decisions were made, right? There was a host. I'm less familiar with the decisions of what went into the Old Testament. This was very interesting, this reading. I didn't realize. The New Testament, I've known for a long time, they had a mess of gospels. They had several gospels. They had several stories of the life of Jesus. And around the year 300, they sat down and said, look, okay, there's too many here. It's not going to go. And We need a unified teaching. There's too much heresy, and we're going to agree on 4. It's these 4. Everybody shut up. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Done. How did they choose that? Why did they just choose that? Well, Appiah doesn't get into that. That's a very long, interesting discussion. That would be a very nice research paper as well. But his point is made. The point being, you know, it wasn't obvious that these were the texts. There were cultural decisions. There were cultural prejudices and pressures at work that said, you know, this is the teaching that we are going to advance, and which books support that the most. End of discussion. And they probably were not too keen on Jesus being revolutionary. Actually, he gets into this issue. I see Arthur's comment. Page 55, he talks about the real issues with Paul. Paul was very revolutionary. Paul says, right, when you are baptized, you are no longer man or woman, Jew or Greek, master or slave. That was an incredibly revolutionary thing to say in the ancient Mediterranean, which is very socially rigid, you know, with a caste system. And scholars suspect that Paul was actually very countercultural in terms of how he viewed women and how he, you know, viewed gender relations and even relations between the different groups, you know, race relations. And ironically is that Paul has come down to us as one of the great reactionaries. He, you know, for some of you have been to, if you ever been to a wedding, sometimes they often give a reading from Paul's letters. And one of the most notorious readings is, women, be faithful to your husbands, be obedient to your husbands. That's in the letters of Paul. Scholars now know he didn't write that. He didn't write that. So Paul wrote a bunch of stuff, and then some people got their hand on it and they said, oh no, oh no, this will not do. We need to make some tweaks in here. And so you have contradictions. On one hand, Paul says there's no more man or women, master, slave. And then he says, women, be obedient to your husbands. There's no clarity there. You know, they're at odds. What is the lesson? The lesson is that religion is a difficult thing for you to rally around as an identifying marker, as a clear identifying marker. The short answer, the short response is, or the message in the short term is, you know, don't go running to scripture, be it Buddhist or Christian or Jewish or Muslim, for easy answers. One of the great debates in the last 20 years has been the Muslim command for jihad. And I've studied this and taught about it elsewhere. It's been a couple of years now, but there's a couple of passages in the Quran which are cited as the, you know, by the way, jihad, my wife is Syrian, so we have a lot of Arabic friends, and we have 2 of them. Their names are Jihad. That's their first name, Jihad. And ever since 9/11, that's not a great name to have, you know? And so I think my friend, he goes by Jay. He's like, hey, call me Jay. Oh yeah, Jay. What does J stand for? Well, I'd rather not say. And jihad has this connotation, right? Like you think of holy war. Actually, jihad, what it really means, I believe, is like conversion, something like conversion or faith challenge. It doesn't need to be literal, and it certainly doesn't need to be proven in battle. The big debate over the call for jihad in the Quran is whether it includes, whether it means you shall be tolerant to people of other faiths or not. We talked about ISIS a few weeks ago. ISIS understood no tolerance. And yet the Quran is not clear. There are several passages where it says, respect the Jews and respect the Christians. And if anybody's interested, I can help you with that research project, because I have the passages marked in my copy of the Quran. But, you know, Christianity has similar problems. I remember several years ago, you know, when you all were children, George W. Bush came out and said, you know, something about, you know, homosexuality is an abomination. Look in the Old Testament. And some people pointed out, you know, that the Old Testament also says you should stone prostitutes, adulterers. I mean, you know, okay. Is that what we're doing? Is that it? Right? Are we? There are contradictory, you know, I'll give you the biggest contradiction of all, because I used to teach this for many years, the death penalty. There's a major schism. There are many conservative Christians who are pro-death penalty. Why? Because the Bible says an eye for an eye. That's true. It says it. But Jesus also said, turn the other cheek. Right? So what do? You have to interpret. You have to interpret. You have to stand back and interpret. And I think, my humble opinion, if you look at the life of Jesus, he tends not to judge. He tends to be charitable and forgiving. Any case, this leads to his claim around page 55 about fundamentalism. You know, fundamentalism is a new phenomenon, he argues. I think I asked you guys to write about this. And it's new because it is an attempt in a globalizing world where, you know, what did globalization do? Globalization urges a homogenous identity. You know, it urges us to buy the same shit, wear the same shit, think the same way, watch the same movies, the same music. And in the face of that, people look for unique identities, and they have started to look at religion as something that defines them and identifies them. That's what fundamentalism is. And he says that's new because religion is not able for that at all. Or be very worried about, or very skeptical about when people define their identities around a religion. Because the religions are such a mixed bag. They have such a diverse past and then a diverse legacy. And what they mean to define about you is hardly clear. You know? So, there you have it. Well, I think I'm out of time here, so I'm going to stop, everybody. But as promised, I will stick around if anybody wants to chat. Okay. So you can expect an email from me in the next week, very soon, probably the next day or two. I'm going to put together a sign-up sheet for next week. If you have not already emailed me about your paper topic, please do that so we can get something ironed out. Feel free to send questions my way. Okay, I think that's everything. All right, have an awesome week, everybody. Peace. I'll talk to anybody who wants to, okay?
Thank you. I love you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Clement. Have a good one.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Hello.
Hello.
And why don't you go? You kind of jumped on it earlier. You want to?
Oh, sure. I mean,